Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for being here on this snowy Tuesday morning and second day of spring break for many of you. We nonetheless appreciate you coming out to join us. And I'm going to turn it over to the Lieutenant Governor for opening remarks.
Well, good morning, and I too want to just say thank you for being here this morning. Lots going on, especially if you are on spring break. We appreciate your commitment to the Future Ready Iowa Alliance. This is our third meeting, and we have a great agenda plan for today. We're going to start with Gallup's Brandon Busteed, and you're going to enjoy having the opportunity to hear from him. Then we're going to have a panel discussion with business leaders, and I think that's going to be very informative too, so we can, hear firsthand what their expectations are and how they really want to be a partner in helping drive the recommendations for the Future Ready Iowa initiative. We're going to dive right into King for a Day. I thank Beth for really cataloging the homework assignments. I think that was, for me, it was very helpful. I'd read through all of them, but then to go back and go through the cataloged part, Beth, I appreciate you doing that. So we've made a lot of progress since the last meeting, January 3rd. I've had an opportunity to meet with the Iowa Business Council. We had a great discussion about what their expectations are and how they can continue to participate. Also have had the opportunity to meet briefly with the counselors, and I think if you read the King for a Day, that was certainly highlighted consistently throughout the comments, the role that they play in helping us get a future-ready workforce. And so I think we were able to disseminate some information from that meeting that I think will be helpful in the discussion also. And anytime I have an opportunity to get in front of a group, I'm talking about Future Ready Iowa Alliance and what we're working on, encouraging them to be a part of it, participate, look for ways that they can weigh in and really help drive this really, really important discussion. I also want to just say thank you to the 5 advisory groups that have they'll be drafting preliminary recommendations, so we'll be discussing those today. I'm eager to learn more about what they've put forward and just really the conversation that's going to take place that helps us get to the recommendation that helps us meet the goal. We have new numbers from Workforce Development. We're at about 58% of Iowans that meet the criteria. So while we're got a ways to go, I'm very confident with the people that we have in this room and really with the can-do attitude that I've seen in Iowa. I believe that we will reach the goal that we've set out. So I just want to say thanks for everything that you're doing. We've got a busy schedule, and so with that, I'll turn it back over to Beth.
Our first speaker this morning, I heard at a conference in Oklahoma City this past June, and it struck me because it was exactly what we were trying to do and think about with the Future Ready Iowa initiative. And I thought we have got to get Brandon to Des Moines, and I really wanted him to talk to all of the Alliance members because what he talks about is such a great synthesis of what it is that we're trying to accomplish. And it's always great to see that reinforced and have the need for this work reinforced. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brandon Busteed, who's the Executive Director for Education and Workforce Development at the Gallup organization from Washington, D.C.
Good morning. I have to start with a confession. So were it not for a coffee that we scheduled with Dr. Franklin and I had this morning at Caribou Coffee, I didn't realize I was on at 10:10 this morning. In my calendar, it had 1 p.m. So I was going to be casually showing up here around 11 a.m. thinking I would be here very early. And Dr. Franklin said, I think you're on at 10:10. And so anyway, the good news is I'm here at 10:10. So that was not in my calendar, so I don't know how we messed that up. But it's a real pleasure to be here. I've had a chance to come to Des Moines a number of times over the last 3, 4, 5 years. And I'm excited, always excited to see the energy, the collaboration. And even though this probably doesn't seem unusual to all of you, these kinds of gatherings are actually pretty rare across the country right now. What do I mean by these types of gatherings? Where there is a collection of education leaders, right, at both the K-12 and higher ed level, a collection of business leaders from different industries, a collection of political and other state leaders in the same room actually having a bit of a workshop conversation. I wish this was happening all over the country. It's just not, right? So first of all, kudos to Iowa, kudos to this community in Des Moines. And I think it's an important place to start because it's also where I think the magic is going to happen relative to the things that need to happen to improve our talent development pipeline in the United States. And I like to start with that description of a talent development pipeline because if we think about this in pretty serious terms, that then all of a sudden makes us realize that these things we call schools and these things we call colleges or universities and these things we call workplaces, that it's all a talent development pipeline. And right now, these are more like castles with moats between them, is the analogy I use, than they are a true talent development pipeline, right? I mean, you think about it, in school, even in the same school district in the United States, you barely follow a student who moves from elementary school to a middle school. Like, what do we know about that student when he or she enters middle school from what we learned about them in elementary school? I mean, very little of that actually moves with the student. I mean, the relationships they had with teachers or administrators, understanding of how they're succeeding or not, like, yeah, you get their academic transcript in some form, but there's a lot that's missing there. And certainly you think about the lack of linkages between what we know from a student leaving high school, right, going into college or university. There's just a lot of things we got to figure out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share a quick synthesis of a lot of research that Gallup's been doing. I want to try and make a little leap from the data in terms of what I think the opportunities are or real challenges from that data. And then I'm going to be here through the rest of the day. And I'm going to be delighted to participate in whatever follow-up conversations or questions people have. So, are you ready for a data deep dive? He's fired up. Rob's always fired up for this kind of stuff. So let me just make sure we've got my lightsaber is working properly this morning. Maybe is it on? It's on. All right. And if it doesn't work, you guys, okay, is it moving now? So real quick, this is the framework that I would like us to think about. What would it look like to build what I call an edge economy? An edge economy would be a seamless linkage, right, across all these things I mentioned, right? Schools. This even, by the way, goes into early childhood learning. So if you've missed the literature on the importance of early childhood learning, like if you, not that you would take either or, because I think these are a both and, but if you said, what's more important for my child's future? An effective Head Start, right, early childhood learning program, or college? And you said you got to pick one or the other. Which one's more important for their development? Early childhood wins every day. And so I say that because it's just so important. I mean, we've seen studies that children from poor families and who live in impoverished areas, by the age of 3, they've heard 30 million fewer words spoken to them. And by age 3, if that's the case, they never make up the distance. They just never make up the distance, right? So when I talk about an edge economy, I am talking about starting literally at birth, and I am thinking about this all the way through retirement. What's one of the fastest growing demographics of learners in the United States? Guess what that is? Retiring baby boomers. My parents are a couple of them. They're actually spending this Friday at Florida Gulf Coast University, which is down the street from their somewhat vacation home that they go to. And they're literally spending a whole day there. They're going to go to lectures on immigration policy. They got a full day plan. They're paying good money to do this, by the way. So if you're thinking about how you might be able to earn some extra income as a college or university, don't offer accredited programs. Just charge a lot of money to retiring baby boomers who have disposable income and want to keep their brain sharp. So here's the point, right? If that's the backdrop of our thinking, here's one of the most important things we need to start with, is an honest question about what is our definition of success for the individual, right? And also, I don't know, you could take that at a level of for our economy, for our state, right? There's a lot of ways you can look at that. But what is our definition of success? And I'm troubled greatly by this. And this comes with a little bias because I'm a guy from Gallup, and I spend a lot of time with data and metrics and thinking about measurement, right? But we've heard the expression, we are what we measure. And I believe that's as true as it's ever been. We are what we measure. There are really important things for human development that we're not measuring at all. And there are things that we think are like the end-all, be-all of success for a human being that we are I mean, we've created massive accountability systems around, and guess what? They might matter a little bit, but they don't, I mean, we've put so much overemphasis on them that we've kind of gotten out of control. So let me just start with our definitions of success through the metrics we currently track in education. And this is basically true for K-12 and higher ed. We might use different words, right? But in one respect, we basically measure education and students and teachers and faculty through three primary metrics: grades, test scores, and graduation rates. Now, it's a little more complicated than that, but not really, right? I mean, we've got persistence and retention. We use different words, right? We have freshman to, sophomore retention. We have 6-year graduation rates. I joke that soon we're going to be tracking 17-year graduation rates. But here's the thing. We've basically boiled education success down to 3 core metrics: grades, test scores, graduation rate. Now, first point, those are important metrics. So this is not me making a case that like we just blow those things up and be done with them. Not at all. What I am going to make a case for is that if that's what we're relying on alone, we are missing so much of the ingredients of success in life and in work, and we need to think about how we can add some broader metrics to our understanding beyond these things. Because here's how crazy it is, right? We have essentially taken input measures, and by way of the various ratings and rankings of the best colleges and universities out there, we put those into a formula, and we determine who are the best colleges and universities, right? So we put a lot of weight. When I say we, I'm talking about the rating and ranking industry that's out there. They put a lot of weight on input measures, the incoming SAT or ACT scores of students, right? What their rank in class was in high school. And we put that in a formula and we go, oh, here's the best colleges and universities. See, here's the thing. We haven't measured, for example, the learning growth and development from the time students matriculated at those institutions to the time they graduated. Wouldn't that be a nifty measure of the best colleges and universities? What was the actual growth of the people from when they arrived to when they left? We have no measure of that whatsoever. No one is systematically measuring learning growth of students from the time they matriculate to the time they graduate. It's just not out there. Here's another one. Maybe we could measure how well they do as graduates, right? And I don't want to talk about people as products, but right, let's use an analogy, right? These are products rolling off an assembly line. You could actually evaluate how well they perform. Now, we do this. Consumer Reports actually does this. Consumer Reports doesn't rate the raw ingredients used to manufacture cars and say, well, it's the best car because it was made with a special titanium alloy. Well, no. They actually get into cars and drive them around, and they hit the brakes, and they see how fast they stop and how fast they accelerate, right? I mean, it's actually a product testing environment. That's how Consumer Reports chooses what are the best cars or whatever else is they're looking at. We have no such measure of that with colleges and universities. And even in our output measures, although these are important things to be tracking, like grades and graduation rates, we've actually started to jeopardize these things. It's our own fault. It's our own fault. So I'll give you an example. The average GPA in higher ed has gone up 1.1 points in the last 30 years. Did you know right now, this is true, I can't make this up, it sounds like a Saturday Night Live skit, the average letter grade in college today is an A. This has been true now for the past 2 years. The average letter grade in college, in the United States, is an A. So as an employer, right, looking to hire a graduate, right, and you see their, 3.6 GPA, like, what does that mean to me anymore? I'll tell you what it means. It means perfectly average. But see, if you graduated 30 years ago and you're now the hiring manager of your company, you go, oh, 36, that's pretty awesome because I only had like a 2.4. Well, guess what? Your 2.4 is basically a 3.6 now, right? I mean, that's how bad grade inflation has gotten across the United States, and there's actually more evidence that it's been more rampant in the most elite institutions. Okay, so there's more evidence of grade point inflation in the elite institutions than nationally, and nationally it's 1.1 points. So when you look at all this stuff, you go, okay, I'm just going to make a simple point. These are necessary but horribly insufficient metrics to understand how well we're performing or how students are performing. Now, as Gallup went out and started asking questions before I get to this, I did interviews of college and university presidents, and it was a one-question interview. I just said, what would you describe as the ultimate outcome of an education, right? So, I sat down with people like you, and I said, what would you say is the ultimate outcome of an education? And what's interesting is that although everybody started in a slightly different place, they arrived at fairly consistent answers, right? They talked about something way beyond I never heard these metrics in it, like, oh, graduation rate and blah, blah, blah. No. It was around, in some form, I'm going to greatly paraphrase these answers, but to have a great job and a great life. So they talked about both those dimensions, right? And by the way, those things intersect in important ways. You've got a great job, there's a good chance you have a great life. Those things are deeply embedded if you do it right. And so as I started to listen to this, I thought, well, geez, we better see if we can't measure some of that stuff, because the things that they were describing were not things that they were measuring or that at a national level we were measuring, right? They weren't measurements that existed. And so this is stuff that Gallup's been working on, right? We've been measuring things like workplace engagement for the last 25 years. We've been measuring well-being, how people rate and evaluate their lives, not just in the United States, but around the world. And these things matter because we've been able to show that these are a link to key performance indicators like productivity and absenteeism and turnover and revenue and profit and all these things that most leaders care greatly about. They may or may not care about engagement and well-being. Those sound like nice things. But in any event, this is another one that's interesting. We did an analysis of college and university mission statements. And if you put it on a word cloud, the most commonly used phrase in college and university mission statements is lifelong learning. It's the most commonly used phrase. And then so this is the question I plan on a lot of people. How are we measuring that? But think about this. This is in your mission statement. There's a good probability that it's in your mission statement because it's the most commonly used phrase. And then when you ask the question, how are you measuring that? I just get blank stares, right? It's like deer in the headlight kind of responses. And it's not because they don't care about those things. It's because they realize that their mission alignment does not tie into what they're measuring. Okay, we are what we measure. Do you think we're doing a good job on lifelong learning just because it's in our mission statement? I think if you're measuring it, you're probably doing a good job. But if you just say it, right, and there's no real value emphasis and no way to follow up and hold yourselves accountable, right, to that, that's a real challenge. So here's my point. Whatever it is in your mission statement, we need to challenge ourselves as to whether or not we're actually measuring those things. And all these things can be measured, by the way. So this is a segue, right? We've been studying well-being, and I'm not going to go into detail on this, but there's questions you can ask people consistently all over the world that tell you a lot about how things are going, right? So when we were looking at the well-being of people in Egypt and Tunisia, for example, in the 5 years before Arab Spring, well-being was just plummeting in both of those countries. So, Gallup was worried about those countries because of our well-being metrics, how people were evaluating and experiencing their lives. Here's the crazy thing. See, GDP in both of those countries in the 5 years before Arab Spring was going up steadily. So if you were looking at GDP, you think things are going very well. If you were looking at well-being, it was a different story. It was literally one of these lines crossing things. And it turned out well-being was a much stronger predictor of the unrest that happened in those countries than a classic economic indicator like GDP. Now, both are important to understand. But so we've been able to show, right, let's just take a company in Iowa. If you have an employee who's thriving in all 5 elements of the way we measure well-being, they have 1/3 the healthcare cost burden to your company than an employee who's not thriving in any. And I don't have to get all employees thriving in all 5, which is a very high bar, right? But for every element, I can move somebody from thriving in none to 1, or 1 to 2, or 2 to 3, right? And by the way we measure well-being, these are actionable things. They're things that you can take control of. They're things that people can help you with. They're things that institutions can do to increase the probability that you are leading a well-being life. And so when you start to tie it to things like healthcare cost burden, it starts to get real. Likewise, we measure things like employee engagement, questions like, and think about how you answer these questions. My opinions at work count. I have a chance to do what I'm best at each day. I have someone who encourages my development, right? It's not, are you satisfied with your job? By the way, you know what percent of Americans are satisfied with their job? 90%. It's a crappy question. It's just, are you satisfied with your job? They're satisfied because they have one, right? You start to get to meet the surface of that, and you ask questions like, well, actually, do you think your opinion counts at where you go, actually, not really. And, you have anybody who's encouraging your development? You're like, no, not at all. You have a chance to do what you're best at each day? Nope, definitely not, right? Those are different measurements. And so I always love it when I see, I see college universities very guilty of this. They'll say 96% of our graduates are satisfied with their degree. I go, oh God, you need to ask a different question, because guess what? National average is like 94% of college graduates saying they're satisfied with their degree. Not the kind of thing that I would put on my website as a highlight, because basically everybody's satisfied with their degree. They have one, okay? Anyway, Here's the point. These questions, like these well-being questions, equate to really critical outcomes, like the things I mentioned, productivity and absenteeism and turnover, even safety incidents on the job. You answer these questions, the one we get criticized for all the time, I have a best friend at work. Right? Everybody goes, come on, Gallup, really? That's one of your 12 best questions in the world? Definitely is. Because if you say strongly agree to that, right, you are more productive, you're more likely to stay at your organization. But think about it. This is true actually for kids in school too. So a kid in elementary school or in high school or in college, right, who says, I have a best friend at school, they're more likely to graduate. I mean, and it makes simple sense. You got a wingman or woman, right, that, maybe you're not excited to go to class, but you're excited to see Bob or Kelly or, right, whoever your best friend is. So these things matter a lot. And so here's the segue I want to make as we think about new metrics and what we mean by our definition of success. There's a distinction I want to draw between behavioral economic indicators and classic economic indicators. And it really revolves around this concept that people call the 70-30 ratio. And here's the idea, that although we love to think about ourselves as rational decision makers, right? Like we take this information in, we look at college ratings and rankings, and we make a rational choice on the college we're going to select for ourselves or for our child. The reality is that 70% of the decisions we make as a human being, small and big, are based on emotion. 70% of our decisions are based on our emotions, not rational information. You know what one of the number one reasons is that college students choose their campus that they end up attending? If you just give an open-ended response, right? You don't have fixed responses. The most commonly phrased response is, it just felt right. I mean, do you think that's a rational indicator or an emotional indicator? But the point is, the emotional indicator, there's something to it. There's something powerful to it. In fact, statistically, about 70%. More important to understand the behavioral economic side of this ledger than the classic economic side. So think about how we measure the health of a nation now. And I've mentioned some of these examples, right? On the left-hand side would be examples of classic economic indicators, things like GDP, things like unemployment, things like crime rates. But see, those are different than measuring well-being. Because well-being and GDP, as we learned in Egypt and Tunisia, were going in very different directions. We know that unemployment, gosh, this is a good one. I could spend an hour on unemployment. What are we nationally? 4.7%. Iowa's 3.3%. Here's a question for you. Do you think it feels like 4.7% unemployment in the United States today? See, most labor economists would say that's a full employment economy. But then, I mean, if you've been alive and paying attention to anything the last 6 months, right, something about that doesn't feel right, because you see a whole bunch of Americans, right, concerned about what was the top issue in this election. Just blew everything else away. Jobs, 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 jobs. Here's the reality. That number is right the way it's calculated, but here's what's also true. That between 2005 and 2015, there were 10 million new jobs created in the United States. 94% of them were part-time or temporary. Literally, all net new job creation in that decade, almost all of it, 94%, came in the form of part-time and temporary jobs. See, now you start to explain why 4.7% doesn't feel like 4.7%, because these 10 million jobs that came into the economy, for some people, right, they do want part-time or temporary work, but for most of them, right, they're cobbling together a handful of jobs. They've got no consistent benefits at any of them, and you can understand why they're suffering in very real ways. What it also misses is, let's just say you were working in Detroit making $80,000 a year, you lose that job, and then out of desperation you take another job making $40,000 a year. See, in the Bureau of Labor Statistics, you still show up as employed full-time for an employer. You're a W in the W and L categories, right? That's a win. But see, what we don't understand is what happened before, right? So I know this point in time, I don't know that you just downshifted from $80,000 to $40,000 a year. For that individual and that family, that is a catastrophic change. They are on the verge of going bankrupt. They are staving off bankruptcy, most likely. So when you think about these metrics, right, we've got to get under the hood of these basic things that we track on this left side of the ledger and think about other things. The one I love, my favorite question on our world poll is this: whether you feel safe walking alone at night in the city or area where you live. That's different than tracking crime rates. I want to know both of them. But see, I can increase DUI rates in Des Moines tonight, because we could just get a whole bunch of police officers, do a bunch of DUI stings, and the DUI rate would just jump up dramatically. Well, that doesn't mean more people are driving around drunk. I mean, it may, but it probably means we just did a big sting operation and nabbed a bunch of folks who were coming home from the bars that night, right? But see, if you ask people the question whether you feel safe walking alone at night, that's a question about fear. See, there's some people around the world who don't feel safe walking alone at night because they're worried their own police force is going to beat them. You see the difference in these questions? If you're a leader of any kind of organization, here's a simple point. You want to know both sides of this ledger. You don't want to just know the right side or the left side. You want to have an understanding of both these things. And the same is true in education. So although we definitely want to understand how we're doing on grades and test scores and graduation rates, I want to know things that get under the hood of that, right? Not just are students getting good grades, are they deeply engaged in that learning? Are they feeling an emotional connection, right, as part of that with the people who are teaching them or the other people they're studying with? To what degree do they see relevance in what they're studying, right? Like, oh, I can see how the math I'm learning now could help me build a rocket because I'm excited about rockets, and right, whatever the answer is. So as we think about how we're doing, here's the segue. You know, for Americans, this is an important point for everybody to understand. It doesn't matter what group we ask, representative general population, parents of 5th through 12th graders, college freshmen, as the UCLA SERP study does. There are many reasons why Americans value higher education, but let me just make it really simple. The number one reason is to get a good job. If we lose track of that, here's the mistake we make. We can start graduating a bunch of students who don't get good jobs, and for them, that's a real bummer. For us, they graduated. That's the last metric we're held accountable for as an institution of higher education, right? And so you've got a lot of situations where you've got students with diplomas, right, getting jobs that don't require a college degree, not getting jobs they were trained for, right? So we've got a lot of, for the consumer, right, for that graduate, him or herself, they didn't get the good job, which was their number one reason for going to college or valuing college. So as a metric is concerned, right, if we don't understand what's happening in the job market for our graduates, we are missing their number one priority for them. So here's the segue. Our college, and I'll use high school graduates too, because I'm going to throw high school data in here. Are graduates career and life ready? This is a good question. If that's their number one reason for valuing higher education, are they career and life ready? Well, let's start with a representative sample of young Americans. So in this data, you've got both high school only grads and college grads, and the reality is, of all the things we were looking for in this study, there are lots of questions on whether you worked in a group to complete an assignment, whether you presented in front of the class, whether you used technology to, all right. There were only 2 questions that were linked to the likelihood that these graduates were successful in their work as young Americans. And it was whether they worked on a long-term project that took more than a few classes to complete, and whether they felt they were able to apply what they were learning to solving some sort of real problem. That's it. I mean, there's the whole, in this particular study, the whole magic pill, right, is long-term project engagement and applying it to some sort of real application. Now, here's the thing. We think about how we can do that in all the STEM courses. We can do this in every single academic subject that's taught. I saw it in Intro to Spanish. I saw a team of 3 students working in a group, right? Their assignment was to come up with an imaginary vacation to a Latin American country. One of them had to design the postcard. They had to think about how they described in this postcard home to their family in Spanish what they did on that vacation, right? And so one was trying to figure out how to translate parasailing, and the other one was working on the design of the postcard. And I mean, my point is, like, we can make this kind of stuff happen in every single subject we teach. This isn't just about like, oh, well, it really doesn't work in the humanities and it only works in the STEM-related courses. Not at all. So here's the other reality, right? Just in terms of getting some reps at real work experience, we're just painfully low in these things. Less than 5% of high school students are currently interning with local organization. That's just unbelievably pathetic. And only 17% report working an hour or more in a paid job in the last week, right? And guess what? There's a lot of well-intentioned parents who are going, yeah, Brandy, maybe you shouldn't work because you need to focus on your grades, because if you don't get good grades, you see, I mean, that's a rational parental decision guiding a student in a way that may or may not be beneficial to their long. I mean, I want to encourage my kids to get good grades, but I also don't want it to be at the cost of having no work experience whatsoever, including in some sort of paid job, right? So now you say, okay, well, what are some of the other important factors? This is a good one. Less than half of students in the United States say they have a chance to do what they're best at each day in school. Think of how many days you would continue to show up at the job you're in if you didn't have a chance to touch that thing that you were really good at. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how long you'd last, right? But it's probably not long. few weeks, a few months, I don't know, right? But you keep showing up and doing stuff that you're not really good at. Now, this isn't a question about they have to do what they're best at all day long, but it's how do we get them to a point where they can touch that moment at some point in the school day. There's this famous parable about the rabbit who goes to school, and on the first day of school, he gets to run a race, and he wins the race, and he comes home and says to Mom, I love school. We had a race, and I won, and then the next day he goes back to school, and they have swimming. And, they throw the bunny in the pool, and the bunny basically almost drowns, and, one of his friends has to pull him out, and he comes home and says, I hate school, Mommy, I hate school. I mean, here's the point, right? I mean, we've got different creatures coming to school who have different talents, right? Different special attributes. And so we need to think about how we do a better job hitting this mark, because if you do, you virtually wipe out disengagement in school. So for students who say they have a chance to do what they're best at some point in the school day, only 1% of them are disengaged at school. And about 86% are engaged, right? So this is a really critical element that we need to think about. And now as we shift to higher education, how are we doing on work and career ready? Well, here's how people think they're doing. So if you interview college provosts, any chief academic officers in the room who are brave enough to raise their hand? All right, I know you were smiling. So your colleagues nationally, I'm not going to say you, I'm just going to say in a representative sample of provosts, actually this data has gone up, so we just got the fresh results 2 weeks ago. It's now 99% who are somewhat or extremely confident they're doing a good job preparing students for success in the workplace. Now, when you ask other groups, right, like a general population of Americans, these are slightly different questions, so I can't do pure apple-to-apple comparison, but you can see there's a big gap in our perceptions here. About 13% of Americans strongly agree college graduates are well prepared for success in the workplace. When you do a representative sample of C-level business executives, it's 11% strongly agree that college graduates have the skills they're looking for. Now, I think there's a mix of perception and reality in here, right, that explains this gap, right? So what would be an academic definition, right? I mean, think about it through the lens of a provost university of being well prepared for success in the workplace. That may be very different. It might be different words you use, right? And so I think there's as much perception as there is real gaps in this, right, in terms of workforce preparation and things like that. But this is a gap we need to solve for, right? This is a gap that we need to solve for. We have to have a better understanding of how we're doing on this. This data indicates that there's a miserable disconnect. I don't think it's a miserable disconnect. I think it is a disconnect, but we also have a miserable marketing program because if we're not able to bridge, here's a simple one. The words liberal arts, as of today, do not work as a good brand for leading to a good job, okay? And so I'm a proud liberal arts grad, but this is a simple point. If you want to lead with the brand liberal arts, those two words couldn't be further in Americans' minds from a path for a good job. Now, that said, think of the substance underneath liberal arts, okay? So put the words away for a minute. Just park the words over here in a little bucket of words that don't work in people's minds as leading to a good job. And you say, okay, what's under the hood of liberal arts? And everybody has a good definition of this, critical thinking, skilled communication, collaboration, maybe cultural understanding, right? You can put a lot of things under it. All those words work way better than liberal arts. But if you just say we're a liberal arts and blah, blah, you kind of lose most of the market in terms of an appeal. And the appeal is, where can I get a good job? You see what I'm saying? So if you're a true staunch believer in the liberal arts, my advice is, let's think about some different words, right? Because the only thing that's hurting liberal arts right now are the words liberal and arts. The substance of it is as relevant as ever before. But what do people call it who want to describe it something else? 21st century skills. What are those? Critical thinking, skilled community, right? So I actually think we're creating some of these problems ourselves. We've got branding issues with the words we're using, or we're not clear about what we mean about some of these things. Here's the reality. What's the number one thing that employers want? It's really simple. An internship or job experience that college graduate had. That's it. It's that simple. In fact, 85% of employers would rather hire a B- student with an internship than an A+ student without one. So this internship experience thing counts for about a grade and a half worth of value in the minds of employers who are trying to hire people. And so let me just segue to the key elements of the college experience that we found in our study. This is from the largest representative study of college graduates in U.S. history. This is now an ongoing study we're doing every year, fresh recruit. And so far, we've been able to identify 6 really powerful ingredients of the college experience that if you strongly agreed to having, it doubles your odds of being engaged in your work over your lifetime, and it doubles the odds that you're thriving in your well-being. You guys can give yourselves this quiz yourself, right? So these were 5-point scales, 5 strongly agree, 1 strongly disagree. Raise your hand if you strongly agree to any of these. So the first one is you say you had at least one professor who made you excited about learning. How many strongly agree to that one? Think about your undergraduate experience. If you got a postgraduate degree, just reflect on your undergraduate experience. Okay, so that's pretty good. A little over 6 out of 10 Americans strongly agree to that question, which sounds really great. And then you start to go, well, that means 4 out of 10 didn't. And the bar on this question is fairly low. I had at least one professor who made me excited about learning, right, over the 4 or 5 or 6 years that I might have been enrolled, right? So now you go, well, is that a really good score or not? I don't know, right? Here's the next one. The professors at my alma mater cared about me as a person. How many of you strongly agree to that? A little different. Fewer hands went up. Nationally, it's 27% of college graduates. Last one was, this is the most powerful one as the odds ratios go. I had a mentor who encouraged my goals and dreams. How many of you strongly agree on that one? And by the way, that person's name is in your head right now, isn't it? Or there's 2 or 3 names in your head. I mean, that was an immediate, no one ever debates that, right? The hand goes up instantly and you know the name, or you're kind of like, well, sort. And if you're in the sort, like, this is the emotional ledger that matters a lot. These things can be measured. Your judgment of them is not a problem of recall, right? I mean, my 77-year-old father was part of our cognitive interviews. I asked him that question. Absolutely. Woody Greeno. I've heard stories about Woody Greeno because he was his mentor. I mean, anyway. Here's the crazy thing, though. Only 2 out of 10 college graduates strongly agree they had a mentor who encouraged their goals and dreams. Yet that's kind of the thing that in every marketing brochure you've ever seen from any college or university, it's like what you visualize happening, right? Because what is it? It's a picture of like 5 kids sitting in, Indian style in the quad on a sunny day, right? And they're like, I mean, that's the visual expectation that we set for college. In reality, if you strongly agree to all 3 of these, you're already just a 14%er in terms of those who hit the mark on all 3. Now, the next 3 are a little different in kind. We kind of categorized them as experiential. The first 3 we kind of called emotionally supported, for lack of a better definition. So see how you did on these. First question. I worked on a long-term project that took a semester or more to complete. How many of you strongly agree to that one? This guy in the back's hitting the mark on all the questions. I've seen your hand go up for all. You're 4 for 4 now, I know. So this one bothers me the most because it's less than a third of all college graduates. And so when you reflect on that, I go, well, like, what were they doing all 4 years? Right? Taking pop quizzes, writing 5-page papers? This one I can't figure out. This one seems so easy to fix. And yet only a third. Now, the next one, I had an internship or a job, this is the critical phrase, where I applied what I was learning in the classroom. How many of you strongly agree to that one? Well done. Way higher than the national average. Because, as you can see, it's only 30%. Here's the thing. We also asked another question in the study. Did you have a paid job during college? See the difference in the questions? If you said yes to that one, how many say yes to that one? I had a paid job during college. Yes. That has no relationship with anything later in life. Now, I'm not saying that was bad. You earn money. You'd be able to pay some bills, right? From that perspective, fantastic. But see, the difference in the questions is where I was able to apply what I was learning in the classroom. When the magic connection between what you're learning, let's just say in the classic academic sense, and what you're applying in a work sense, that's where the magic happens. And all the ways we can do. See, students are responsible for this themselves, okay? I mean, faculty certainly, and staff, and an institution in terms of the values it espouses. Everybody plays a role in this. The last one was another sorting question, because we asked a long list of what extracurricular activities were you involved in, check the box, right? But this was a separate statement. I was extremely involved in an extracurricular activity organization. How many of you strongly agree to that one? Pretty high percentage. You're still extremely involved, aren't you, in an extracurricular activity organization? Good for all of you. Now, so here's the reality, though, that if you take all 6 of these together, anybody in the room hit all 6? Strongly agree to all 6 of them? 1, 2, 3. Wow. Oh, my gosh, it's like a quarter of the room. You're a 2.7%er. Think about that. 2.7% of college grads hit the mark on all 6. Now, that's a really high bar. Oh, no, what happened to my values? What's going on with my values? Something's wrong with my slide, but you don't need to worry about it. Don't look at the percentages. Just focus on the bars. The percentage of college graduates who hit the mark on all 6 of these is, rounded up, 3%. So you're looking at what percent hit the mark on 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and none of these 6 things that I just quizzed you on. What you'll see is that on the left-hand side, a quarter of all college graduates in the U.S. are a 0 on that 6-question scale. A quarter. Here's what blows my mind. Everybody in this data set met the academic requirements to receive a diploma from their institution. Now, we asked another question. How well prepared were you for life outside of college? Isn't that a great question? I mean, who's the only judge of that? You. I mean, you're the only, I could make judgments about how well prepared you were, but you're the only one that can judge that question. Here's the reality. If you strongly agreed to all 6, as many of you in this room did, 85% of those graduates strongly agree they were well prepared for life outside of college. If you didn't hit the mark on any of these things, it's 5%. It's a 17x differential across this 6-question scale. And again, 100% of them met the academic requirements to receive a diploma from their institution. Here's the thing. These 6 things that I've mentioned, these are questions we can ask of all current students. These are questions we can ask of all graduates. These are not difficult things to measure. Would I judge my whole success on responses to these? No. But would I add this to my other metrics, right? Absolutely. Because the reality is the difference in graduates feeling well prepared for success and being engaged in work later, right? Thriving in their well-being. These are just unbelievable differences as we look at this 6-question scale. So I'll leave it at that. I don't have my watch on. How are we on time? Do we have time for some Q&A? Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Well, fire away. What are you interested in? Yes.
Have you looked at how the graduate results correlate with employee?
Oh, yes. Well, so one of the things we're measuring in this study is not just household and personal income. Those are things we ask, what kind of job you're in. We measure whether they're engaged in their work, whether they're thriving in their well-being. We can cut that by, looking at their majors. We can cut that by institutional typology. There's a lot of different ways we can look at it. But so those relationships I was sharing on those 6 questions are so if you strongly agreed to any of those, it basically doubles the odds that you end up engaged in your work later in life, regardless of the kind of job or industry you're in, right? So that's just kind of it kind of levels, it's like it just levels the playing field, so to speak, as it relates to workplace engagement later. And so, through the lens of Gallup's research, we know that that's critical. Only 30%, well, it's 32% now of the U.S. workforce is engaged at work. So we have about 100 million people who show up for work every day in the United States, and basically that means 32 million of them are engaged at work. There's another 22 million or so who are actively, cancerously, horribly disengaged, right? They're so miserable that they don't just keep their misery to themselves. They actually try and spread it to everybody at work. So like if Rob had an awesome idea today and I was horribly disengaged, I'd just come up and sit with you until your idea goes away. Do you know anybody like that in your life? But if you just think about the needle that could be moved, right, by focusing on these elements of what it means to be engaged in our work and the things that, correlate with being engaged in work later as it relates to education, it's pretty critical. Like I mention this all the time, but of all professions in the United States, K-12 teachers are dead last in saying their opinions at work count. So, this is an interesting challenge for the superintendents in the room. It's an interesting challenge for all of us because, by the way, we've now done studies of college faculty, and they don't look great either. And so not quite as bad as K-12 teachers on this scorecard, but also, ironically, very low on questions about their own learning and growth. So you think of the irony of that, right? College and universities are like learning organizations, and yet, college faculty, if you do this as a national picture, they're relatively low on questions about their own learning and growth. Somebody talking about their progress, right? Someone who encourages their development. And you realize you've got a lot of eagles that don't flock, right? There's structural challenges with how we might improve that. But as I think about K-12 schools in America, I think as a principal, I've never been a principal, but I've encouraged principals to think about their job as driving teacher and staff engagement. Because if they do that really well, that's the number one driver of student engagement. It's not, by the way, a technological device. I mean, if you looked at our national policy investments right now, you'd think that the magic, fix to student engagement was an iPad. But the reality is it's an engaged teacher. But see the difference, like we're not focused on driving teacher engagement in buildings right now. We're not focused on staff and faculty engagement as much as we could. So these are opportunities for leaders to lead in different ways, in ways that will move the metric very quickly. Other questions or comments or responses?
So are there you think have taken this research?
Yeah, so I'm seeing a lot of examples of individual colleges and universities, right? I can't think of a state level example, right? But certainly individual institutions, mainly led by a leader who said, we value these things. We're gonna go in a direction where we make sure we're measuring these things. We're gonna put an intentional, investment, not just dollars, but it's more, time and energy and resources around it. So actually, Dr. Frank and I were talking about this this morning. Furman University has just banked their whole new strategic plan on these 6 elements. They just got a $47 million grant from the Duke Endowment, right? And they're going to literally guarantee, this is their goal, that every student who goes to Furman hits the mark on these elements. Now, that's not easy to do, right? Because you realize 100% have to have an internship. That internship can't just be an internship, because I can measure that. Did you have an internship? What I really want to know is, was there any connectivity to things you were learning? That's a little harder bar. I want to know both, right? But so when you start to get under the hood more, you realize it's not as simple as like, oh, everybody has an internship. I mean, how many of those internships were, let's just call curated, work learning experiences where a professor was involved, an academic department was involved, the employer was involved. If you think about it, employers have a huge role to play here. And so to answer your question, I see lots of great individual examples happening. And I do start to see more of this being talked about at both the K-12 and higher ed level. The big frustration I continue to have, which many education leaders have, is that the current system is stacked entirely against paying any attention to these things. And so even if you think about the work example, stuff like that, like I was down at Miami-Dade College a couple months ago with Eduardo Padron. I mean, they're a huge success story, but he was interested in having us help him come up with new success metrics. Here's why. He said, our 2 fastest growing programs we're getting no credit for. I said, what do you mean? Tell me more. And he said, well, we've got a coding boot camp we started. And he said, no one ever graduates from Miami-Dade College from that program because they all get jobs. Wait a minute, tell me that again. I mean, see what I'm saying? It's a non-accredited program. Okay, so it's not even accredited because it's a coding boot camp, yet 100% of the students going through it are getting jobs, which for them is a fantastic outcome. Now, many of them you would still encourage to continue forward and get a degree, right? But I mean, they're getting the immediate thing they were seeking, a job, and yet Miami-Dade is getting, not only not getting credit for it, they're getting dinged because those are all students who are dropouts. And you go, what's the insanity? I mean, this is insanity, right? But there's hairy stuff you've got to unpack here. State policy, federal, right? I mean, there's a lot of stuff in here. So here's the point. The outliers are doing it in spite of the system, not because of the system. They're creating a new system on the side next to the existing one because that's the only way that they can kind of move forward. And it's not easy. So I have great respect for the education leaders who are starting to break out of the pack on this, but we're not helping them. I mean, when I talk about a systems level, we got to think of ways that we might be able to help them. And or the ones who break out of the pack, just ways to recognize their success. If they're not getting it recognized through the classic metrics of accredited programs and graduation rates, how can we herald that success in different ways? 100% job rate. Guess what? To citizens of Iowa, that's about as important a metric as you could possibly show. This is a great question. There were a couple more. Yeah, yes, sir. Yep, so there are now 23 published studies in academic journals that show that hope, which some of you are familiar with grit, Angela Duckworth and her work at Grit has become very famous. The term grit has become famous. Grit and hope are like cousins in terms of measurements, right? And so here's the thing. Hope is a series of questions that measure your ideas and energy for the future. That's what the world's experts on hope would say. And so your ideas and energy for the future as a student are stronger predictors of whether you will complete college than what your SAT or ACT scores were when you started. Now, don't get me wrong, SAT and ACT scores still have some predictive validity in graduation rates, okay? So I'm not detracting from that. But in terms of the variance of success, hope actually accounts for a greater percentage of the variance than those test scores do in terms of the likelihood of completing. And to put a little finer point on, one of the more recent studies showed that hope has about the equivalent of a full letter grade. So if you look at college freshmen at the end of first semester freshman year and the likelihood that they persist to the second semester, those who have high hope and low grades are more likely to persist than those with low hope and high grades, but the difference is about one letter grade. So in other words, if you're a 3.0 with high hope, you're more likely to come back than a 4.0 with no hope. But it's about a letter grade difference that hope accounts for. Yeah, so they're really simple, straightforward questions. Now, here's what I'll say about these things, right? Measures of hope, measures of grit, measures of well-being, right? They're very powerful measures, but what you can't do, this is my warning, because we've done this with tests. People, by the way, people in the United States, there's a negative tone about testing in the United States. Here's what they're negative about. They're negative about accountability testing in the form of summative testing, right? In other words, I submit a score, it goes up to the state, it goes up to the federal level, and nothing of use ever comes back down to me, the student or the parent. By the way, people love formative assessments. So if I take a test and it gives me information about how I can learn better or what I can do as a parent to help my child read more, we love that kind of testing. See, so you got to get under the surface of this. Anyway, back to the point. We can't make a game out of measures of hope and grit and well-being, right? The second somebody thinks that just answering all fives on a survey is how I get into, you see what I'm saying? You know, so I want to measure these things, but I don't want to turn it into a full-blown accountability measure in the sense where people are, you know, like we've done with grades and testing, you know, starting to just game the system in ways, right, that are just disadvantageous to us. So they all have their rightful place and rightful balance. You know, I wouldn't, but anyway, here's the thing. For a teacher to understand this, simple examples. I watched this being done in a first grade class where the teacher prompted every interaction with every student with what they wanted to be. So she said, well, Brandon, if you want to be a doctor someday, and then blah, 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 right? Or, you know, if you want to be a fireman someday, guess what? She asked them every day what they wanted to be. Sometimes those answers changed. But her job, that she believed, was trying to connect their future, at least what they saw as an exciting part of their future, to what they were learning right now. You want to learn how to read? You know, you can't be a doctor if you can't read. You can't, right? I mean, and so she was constantly dangling their future in front of them. Right, so as a practical example, you know, I say this to all adults, and I'm a parent of 5- and 7-year-olds, so I try to say it to myself as well in my parenting role. How can you help somebody get energy and enthusiasm for their future if you don't ask them what they're interested in? And for my kids, it changes. So for my son, it vacillates between American Ninja Warrior, veterinarian. I mean, you know, like I'll get different answers from him, but I use that as fuel for his energy and excitement and motivation and things like that, right? So, you know, one of the most important jobs we can do in showing up with college students or young children is to ask them about what they want to be, what they want to do, what gets them excited, and find ways to draw that in. So if I know you love cars and you're in my math class, what do you think I should do? I should figure out how to give you an assignment that relates to the math you're learning that has something to do with cars. That takes a little bit of imagination. It doesn't take a lot of imagination, and great teachers just do it naturally. I mean, it just, you know, they come in and they figure out how each individual student ticks, and they use that information. Anyway, the point about it is that there's questions you can ask people. You know, like when you measure hope, there's 3 components, very briefly. There's goals. So the first component is like, do you have any articulated goal for the future? You know, I want to graduate from college, or I want to be a doctor, or whatever it is. The other one is pathways, which is measured by whether you see multiple pathways to accomplishing that goal. And the other one is agency, which is like grit, right? Your belief in your ability to make it so. Here's the interesting thing. When we measure hope, people are not usually low on hope because they have no goals, and they're not usually low on hope because they have no agency. I mean, sometimes it's the case. Most of the time, they're low on hope because they don't see more than one path to accomplishing that goal. So here's a great hope test. You say, oh, you want to graduate from college. That's great, Brandon. Well, how are you going to do it? And you go, you know, I'm just going to study every night. And I go, okay, well, that's probably a great plan, but what happens if that doesn't quite cut it? And so, if the next answer is like, what do you mean? Like, that's an indicator that that's a person who maybe saw one pathway to accomplish that goal and didn't think about, well, what if that didn't work, right? What's my, so people who go, well, if that doesn't work, I'm going to go do X, and if that doesn't work, I'm going to do Y. But see, as adults and as teachers and role models, we have an opportunity to expand their pathways, right? To challenge them on that. Okay, if that doesn't work, what's the alternative to it? So anyway, that's a little bit of a digest on the hope question, if that's helpful. Well, has he had an internship or two? Okay, all right, yeah. Well, my best advice is make sure he's got an internship before he graduates. Yeah. Well, I mean, as a measurement of understanding people's behaviors, there's no difference between generation, right? I mean, that emotional, rational stuff is pretty ingrained in what it means to be a human being. That said, right, I think you're asking another question, which is true. We just did a huge study of millennials. They value more than previous generations things like mission, things like growth and development. Okay, so if you're a company that wants to recruit or retain millennials, the single most important thing they're looking for is whether they will be learning and growing in that job and role, right? Which means, this was interesting, I was just sitting with the CEO and CHRO of Northrop Grumman yesterday for breakfast, and they were talking about their internship program. By the way, they hire 90% of their interns. It is their entire talent development pipeline. They do stringent recruiting on the front end, right? People they would hire anyway for their internship program. Almost 90% they're hiring in roles, but the interesting insight was they said for millennials, their biggest challenge was if they got them into a role in an internship at Northrop Grumman and they didn't like it, they very quickly pivot and say, oh, well, we've got another program over here. Go give this a try. And what it does is it sends the message that if I come to work for a company like Northrop and I'm in a job here where I'm kind of like, I'm stagnating, I'm not quite interested, they've got another project over here. Right, I can get into a different kind of thing. Now, that's an example for a big company. You can do this in small companies too, through a process that I call job crafting. Okay, so let's just say I hired you to be director of marketing, and you start to take some bigger interest in sales and whatever. And now, if I know that, right, you and me together can work on crafting your job a little bit, so you're doing a little bit more of that. And you see what I'm saying? Like, we can do this even within the constraints of like what a job title is, even with a small organization. But for millennials, they want to be connected to the mission and purpose. They want to know that their role connects to that, right? So the best thing you can do as a manager of millennials, every day show up and go, Rob, that work you're doing in accounting today, it's going to blah, 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 make the world a better place. Like, stretch that. Even if you can't come up with really good, but that kind of, you're doing something that matters for our organization. You're helping move the needle on our performance. You're helping, those are the kinds of reinforcements. And by the way, that's a different form of managing, but it's not costly. It's about time and energy and values and emphasis. It's not, by the way, it's not pay them more. Do they want to make more? Sure. But it's not pay them more. It's learn, grow, and if they are in a place where they're learning and growing, they will be very, very loyal and very productive workers. So, yeah.
So, Brandon, I appreciate this work.
Yeah.
Because there's lots of ways that
Yeah.
they raise a couple $100,000.
Yeah.
Another example,
Yeah.
my son, who graduated from
Yeah. Awesome.
he did undergraduate research. Offered him the job 2 days later.
Interesting.
The shade house and the greenhouse.
Yeah.
Money to get the supply.
Yeah.
Organize the students, design it, build it.
Right.
Beyond internship, we've got to
Yeah.
make sure that we're
Yep.
lots of ways to apply learning.
Yep. So I'm glad.
Can I
Yeah.
say this one
Yeah.
more thing? I think one of the most important things that we can do K through 12. And there's a whole host of
Right.
that really are contributing.
Yep.
It's not the first time.
Yep. And so I'm glad you ended that point, right? Because I mean, obviously, I've emphasized internship, but look at these three together. They're exactly what you just said, right? In this one, it's project-based learning. I mean, and over a long period of time, right? So think about an audit of all the classes that are offered at a campus. You could go do this today, right? How many of them require a semester-long project, either a capstone experience, whatever? I mean, these are not real internships. I mean, these are a mimicking of what real-world works looks like in the form of long-term project. The need to iterate, the need to work in a group. So if I just said, what's one of the magic things we can plug into every educational system in the world? Project-based learning. I mean, think about you can teach the same content, but wrap it all around long-term project-based learning exercises, and that alone is a home run, because that is very much getting at what a work environment looks like and operates around. That is the perfect kind of preparation for a successful internship. And by the way, the other things that mimic that, and it's no surprising these three things are on this list, is extreme involvement in extracurricular activity. My only caution there is I see a lot of graduates with like 17 things listed on their resume, right? And I always get real suspicious because I go, that probably came at the cost of being deeply, meaningfully engaged in any one of them. Not always, but that's where I get suspicious. So the example of the year-long project, right? That's something I can tease out in an interview. That's something, I mean, I can get to the bottom of that. Rather, were you a member of the environmental society, whatever it is, right? Yeah, I was a member. Okay. But I also did a project, right, where I started I actually started a permaculture garden in Durham when I was a student. So that example resonated a lot. But I mean, those are things that you can tease out. Those are things that you can know. And they're incredibly valuable experiences because they all are getting at some form of the same thing, right? A long-term engagement in something that you get meaningfully into, as opposed to just lightly kind of touching at various points. So that's a great point to wrap up on. I think I'm getting the hook. I see the hook.
We could talk all day.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, appreciate it. You want this up here? Yeah.
Very good.
Thank you.